Welcome to another deep dive, this time into a case from Sweden. And again, it's fascinating and it's truly heartbreaking.
Yeah.
We're going to a suburb called Duvich.
Oh, okay.
You know, the kind of place where it seems like it's idyllic. Kids can play outside without a worry. Everyone knows their neighbors and, life just seems peaceful.
Right.
But all of that changed on August 16th, 1998.
What really gets me about this is how quickly those assumptions of this peaceful community were just shattered. It really shows you that you have to look beyond the surface,
Yeah.
especially when you're dealing with an investigation like this.
Exactly. So let's paint a picture for everyone. It's a sunny Sunday afternoon.
Okay.
4-year-old Kevin Shalmarson is out on his bike. He's just riding around. Everyone in Dovich knew Kevin, always waving as he rode by.
Oh,
Around 6:30 p.m., his mom, Therese, realized that he hadn't come home.
right.
And so a search begins, and tragically, Kevin is found by the lake,
Oh.
lying lifeless on a wooden pallet.
I mean, you would think accidental drowning.
Right.
A horrible thought, but it does happen,
It does is.
especially near water.
Yeah, and that's what everyone initially believed, right?
Right.
But here's where things take a turn for the worse.
Okay.
So remember, in Davik, children playing unsupervised was the norm.
Right.
This is a very safe place.
Yeah.
So the next day, some school children, they find Kevin's missing shoes and a sock
Oh.
behind a shed.
Okay.
And that discovery raised a lot of red flags.
Absolutely. I mean, those shoes and where they were found, that just completely shifted everything.
Yeah.
It wasn't a tragic accident anymore. It was
Yeah.
something much worse.
And then came the autopsy report.
Yeah.
The findings were disturbing. Bruises on his body, signs of sexual assault. There was sand in his underwear. It all pointed to murder.
Yeah.
That image of Dovik being idyllic was completely shattered, and it was replaced by fear and this desperate search for answers.
This is where we see the human cost of something like this.
Yeah.
Not just a single tragedy, right?
No.
An entire community is shaken to its core. The
Mhm.
trust, the safety, everything changes.
Imagine living in that place. You trust your neighbors, your kids play together,
Right.
and then this happens.
It's hard to fathom.
Yeah. And to make matters even worse,
Yeah.
imagine losing your child
Right.
and then having the suspicion and judgment from your own community.
Oh my gosh.
That's exactly what Kevin's mother, Therese, faced.
Wow.
There were all these rumors, there were false leads,
Yeah.
unfounded accusations directed at her.
That's awful.
It's just heartbreaking. But before we dive into who those accusations were directed towards, let's go back to the investigation itself.
Okay.
Because there was conflicting evidence right from the start.
Uh-huh.
The initial theory of drowning didn't really quite line up with the forensic evidence.
Right.
Because you think about it, Kevin was found in shallow water,
Yeah.
and yet there were signs of strangulation and assault.
It just doesn't add up.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
So if it wasn't a simple drowning, what were investigators looking at?
Right.
What kind of leads did they even have at this point?
Well, they were facing a huge challenge. How do you interview children
Right.
who might be key witnesses?
Yeah.
I mean, their memories work differently. They're
Uh-huh.
still developing their language skills.
Yeah.
The risk of misinterpreting what they say or leading them with questions, it's incredibly high.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle with pieces that kept changing shape.
Right.
And in this case, it's even more complicated because some of the children were refugees.
Oh, wow.
So you add that layer of complexity, their experience with war and authority figures,
Right.
that could create even more communication barriers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the police brought in a child psychologist named Ingrid Hurison,
Okay.
and she specialized in these types of cases.
Mhm.
Sexual assault.
Yeah.
Her methods were considered very innovative at the time,
Okay.
but later on they actually became quite controversial.
Interesting.
Yeah, instead of a typical interrogation room,
Right.
she focused on building trust with these children.
Mhm. So it was more like creating a safe and comfortable environment
Exactly.
where the kids might open up
Yes.
rather than feeling pressured or scared.
Precisely. She used things like play treats and, design these interview spaces to be
Right.
child-friendly.
Yeah.
But as I mentioned, some of these methods really came under fire later on.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's talk about these two young boys
Yeah.
who end up at the center of this case.
Yeah.
Robin, who was 5 at the time,
Okay.
and his 7-year-old brother, Christian,
Mm-hmm.
and their father, Viner. He was actually trying to help the police.
Okay.
He agreed to tell them anything that his boys might say about Kevin's death,
Right.
thinking maybe they'd seen something.
Mm-hmm.
And one day, while he's driving them to get candy,
Okay.
he overhears something, that sends chills down his spine.
Oh my gosh.
He overhears Christian mention seeing Kevin talking to big guys on the day that he died.
Wow.
And then Robin adds, I saw them murder Kevin.
What?
So you can imagine the shock, the confusion.
I can only imagine.
Reiner immediately took the boys to the police station, believing that they held crucial information.
Wow. Okay.
But here's where the story takes a turn.
Okay.
Robin's accounts were inconsistent.
Huh?
Each time he was questioned, the details changed.
Wow.
Different perpetrators, different causes of death. Sometimes Kevin was stabbed.
Oh my.
Sometimes he was pushed into the water. How do you even begin to make sense of that?
That's where the police's interpretation of these inconsistencies is really crucial.
Right.
They were increasingly influenced by the work of a memory specialist, Professor Sven Christensen,
Okay.
who was a proponent of the concept of repressed memories.
So they started to think that maybe the boys were somehow involved,
Yeah,
but they had blocked out the memory because it was just too traumatic.
exactly.
That's a heavy thought.
Right.
Children as perpetrators is such a violent crime.
This theory of repressed memories completely steered the direction of this investigation.
Wow.
Professor Christensen was brought in to analyze the interviews, and his conclusion was very clear. Robin and Christian either knew exactly what happened to Kevin, or they were directly involved in his death.
And this is where the pressure on these two little boys really ramps up.
Absolutely. They were separated from their parents,
Yeah.
subjected to hours and hours of questioning.
It's unimaginable what they must have gone through.
And the techniques that were used during these interrogations were controversial, to say the least.
Yeah.
The boys were taken back to the scene of the crime.
Oh, wow.
They used dolls to try to reenact what happened.
Okay.
And the questioning relentlessly focused on Kevin's neck injury.
Right.
Details which were supposed to be confidential.
It sounds incredibly intense, especially for children that young.
Absolutely.
And did it work? Did the police get what they were looking for?
Well, under that pressure,
Yeah.
the boys eventually gave a confession,
Wow.
and it sent shockwaves through the community and across Sweden.
Yeah.
This was unprecedented. This was the first time in modern Swedish history that a child was being blamed for killing another child.
So Robin and Christian became the scapegoats.
Right.
But what about all those inconsistencies in their stories?
Yeah.
What about the lack of physical evidence?
Right.
It seems like a lot of doubt was brushed aside to reach that conclusion.
It's a really important point. The reliance on repressed memory therapy
Right.
raises serious ethical questions, especially when it comes to children.
Yeah.
The potential for false memories, for coercion. It's a deeply troubling aspect of this case.
And what about the impact on Robin and Christian?
Oh my gosh.
Being labeled child killers.
Right.
Their families ostracized.
Yeah.
Forced to relocate. It's hard to imagine the trauma.
It really is.
This case really highlights how the pursuit of a quick resolution can lead to devastating injustice.
It does.
But the story doesn't end there.
Okay.
As we'll see in the next part of our deep dive, there's a twist that'll challenge everything we thought so far.
Okay.
You won't want to miss it. We left off with Robin and Christian branded as child killers. You know, their lives and the lives of their families completely upended.
Yeah.
But almost 20 years later, a neuroscientist, Professor Richard Schoberg, enters the picture.
Okay.
And he noticed these striking similarities between the Kevin case
Right.
and another very infamous case in Sweden, the Thomas Quick case,
Okay. Yeah.
which also heavily relied on recovered memory therapy.
Right.
It was a case that was eventually completely debunked.
Yeah.
So Professor Schoberg wasn't even an expert in child psychology
Right.
or criminal justice.
He was a neuroscientist.
He was a neuroscientist.
So he was looking at this case from a completely different perspective.
Yeah.
One that focused on how memory actually works.
And this was also a time when skepticism about repressed memory therapy was growing.
Yeah.
Research was starting to show that instead of uncovering hidden truths, these techniques could actually create false memories.
Right.
People confessing to crimes they never committed based on memories implanted by therapists.
It's a terrifying thought.
It's a terrifying thought, so troubled by what he saw.
Yeah.
Professor Schoberg reached out to journalist Dan Josephson,
Okay.
who had been instrumental in exposing the flaws in that Thomas Quick case.
Right.
And Josephson, being the kind of journalist who doesn't shy away from a challenge, dove headfirst into the Kevin case.
I can only imagine.
He and his documentary team spent months meticulously piecing together the details.
Oh.
They got access to interrogation transcripts, They got video footage. They even interviewed people who were involved in the original investigation.
Wow.
What they uncovered was explosive.
Uh-huh.
They found this pattern of unethical interrogation methods.
Right.
They found overlooked alibis.
Yeah.
And a complete lack of any evidence linking Robin and Christian to the crime.
Wow. So it's like watching a house of cards just crumble.
It is.
You start to question everything you thought you knew.
You do. And remember the Grove family.
Yeah.
They had children who played with Robin and Christian on that day. And their testimony, which was corroborated by multiple witnesses, placed those boys under constant supervision during the critical time frame.
So a rock-solid alibi.
A rock-solid alibi.
Completely ignored.
Completely ignored by investigators.
Wow.
And the documentary didn't stop there.
Okay.
It brought to light a potential person of interest who had never even been properly investigated.
Okay.
A 13-year-old boy named Felix.
I see.
Who was seen with Kevin on the day that he died.
Okay.
And what's even more disturbing is that Felix was later convicted of raping a 3-year-old boy.
Oh my gosh. So not only were the wrong people accused,
right,
but a dangerous person was overlooked.
Potentially overlooked.
Bro.
The impact of this documentary was immediate and overwhelming.
Right.
There was this public outcry, media scrutiny.
Yeah.
It led to a formal case review by Chief Prosecutor Nicholas Hagstrom.
Okay.
And the result? Robin and Christian were officially exonerated.
Wow.
After 20 years
it's amazing.
of living under this cloud of suspicion.
This was a huge victory. Not just for those two men,
Yeah.
but for the truth itself.
Yeah.
The documentary and the case review forced everyone to confront the flaws, not just in this investigation,
Right.
but the broader use of repressed memory therapy and the potential for devastating consequences.
It's a powerful example of how journalism can really shine a light on injustice.
Yeah.
And bring about real change. But what about Kevin?
Yeah.
Will we ever know the truth about what happened to him?
Sadly, I think that might remain a mystery.
Yeah.
The prosecutor in this case explored a lot of different possibilities, including accidents during play, but no definitive conclusion could be reached.
Right.
It's a tragedy compounded by the fact that we may never know exactly what happened.
It's a tough reality to accept.
It is.
But even amidst all the sadness and the anger,
Yeah.
there was a glimmer of hope.
Okay.
Robin and Christian, along with their families and with the support of Kevin's family, established the Kevin Foundation.
Ah, that's nice.
It's a beautiful way to honor his memory.
It is.
They award scholarships to vulnerable teenagers in Arvika,
Wow.
turning their pain into something positive.
It speaks to their resilience.
It does.
And their commitment to preventing something like this from happening again.
But this case leaves us with a lot to think about, doesn't it?
It really does.
Systemic flaws,
Yeah.
ethical boundaries,
Yeah.
the long-lasting impact of trauma. It's a lot to unpack.
A lot to unpack. This case demands critical thinking. It asks us to question our own assumptions and recognize the human cost when investigations go wrong.
Right.
We can't bring Kevin back,
Oh.
but we
yeah.
can learn from his story
Yeah.
and fight to ensure that justice is served not just in the cases that make headlines,
Right.
but in every corner of our society.
And maybe the most important takeaway is that the truth matters.
Absolutely.
Even when it's uncomfortable, even when it challenges what we believe. We have a responsibility to seek it out, to amplify the voices of those who have been silenced, and to hold those in power accountable.
The Kevin case shows us that justice delayed isn't always justice denied. But the fight for truth demands constant vigilance and a willingness to challenge the status quo.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a story that stays with you long after the episode ends.
It really does.
It makes you reflect, it sparks conversations, and hopefully it renews our commitment to seeking justice, no matter how complex or challenging the path may be.
I think so too.